Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today has happened something that I never thought would happen. And that is I've pulled out my Thoth deck by Aleister Crowley. Is the earth shaking? I don't know. Now I have to say this ahead of time. I've always admired the artwork by Lady Frieda Harris. I've always thought each one of those oil paintings, which I believe she did each one of them in oil paintings, have got to be beautiful to behold. There's no question in my mind. The cards are beautiful. But I've never subscribed to Crowley's philosophy, his lifestyle. It was just never something that I was attracted to. Plus, he associated all these other features to his deck, which I felt just overly complicate the matter. You either know what the cards mean or you don't. You don't need 1,000,001 different symbols. And that's just my idea. I'm sure it's very unpopular. However, I think it's probably an interesting thing to compare the Etteilla deck with the Thoth Crowley deck, because both Edward Arthur Waite and I think Crowley were a bit dismissive of Etteilla, even though I think they both borrowed from Etteilla. And in a video I did a couple days ago, or I don't know how I'm going to release some of these videos that I've done. I haven't decided in what sequence to release them. But in one of the previous videos that I've done, I compared meanings, right, I've compared the Etteilla with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, both by looking at the Triumph cards or the Trump cards, as well as with the Pip cards. And so I figured I'd do the same thing today with the Thoth. I probably will do the whole deck, unless it gets to be very, very long, then I'll break it up between what they would have called the major arcana, and then I'll do the minor arcana second. And I don't think in those terms, but I'll use the words so some of you who might be watching this who don't understand what I'm saying when I say the higher order cards or the Triumph cards or the Trump cards. Okay, now, before I flip the camera, I do want to mention that Etteilla had a very distinct order. He did not put the cards in the order that he would have been familiar with through Tarot of Marseille. He reordered the cards. Now, fortunately, Aleister Crowley and Rider-Waite-Smith, for the most part, put them in the typical order that we're accustomed to, with the exception of Justice and Fortitude, which they switched, which I can live with. Not that I like that, but it's a lot easier to put a deck together, So for that reason, I've put these cards in the order that Etteilla put them, at least the higher order cards, the major arcana cards, because his deck is so much harder to put in order. So I'm just kind of practical about the whole thing. So let me flip the camera and we will take a look at the higher order cards first. And then if we have time, I'll do the Pip cards. And if we don't have time, it'll just be another video. Okay, so let me identify the two decks we have. This is the Etteilla by Marco Benedetti. In case you haven't noticed, I've used this deck. I featured this deck in probably at least 4 or 5 different videos. It's a superb publication of the Etteilla deck. This deck I don't think is anything special as far as, what I mean is the publication of this purple deck, I don't think is anything special. In fact, I got this deck very late in the game. I just never was attracted to the concepts behind it. I read the book. I read a couple books on it, and I never got a warm and fuzzy. So I don't really know. I think this probably is like the least expensive and least amazing of all the published decks of Aleister Crowley. The reason I bought it was because my husband and I made a trip to New Orleans, and we went to Madame Laveau's grave. We saw her grave, and then of course that prompted us to go to her store that it has her name, which is kind of like a witchy store, a woo-woo store. And of course it had it had a handful of tarot decks, and this one was the only one of the ones that I I had all the ones that they showed already, or I wasn't interested in any of those other ones, but I was determined to buy a deck from there because, come on. So I ended up buying the Thoth because I knew I didn't have a Thoth. And I figured I would get it. And here's the receipt. I saved the receipt. Marie Laveau, excuse me. Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo. Now, what year was this? I paid $23.95 for it. I don't think it shows a date. Well, I don't know the date. Oh, February. Well, we went during Mardi Gras a number of years ago, so I guess anyway, that's where I got it and why I got it. I got it because it was the only deck I didn't already have, or of all the ones that they had available, it was the one that I was probably the most interested in buying. I just had to buy a deck, so I did. Okay, now one of the things that I've mentioned a few times is that Etteilla reordered most of these cards, the Triumph cards, and he eliminated 4 cards, that they don't appear in the deck. He's eliminated the female Pope, the Empress, the Emperor, and the Pope. Now, that's not unusual because I mentioned in another video, and I've mentioned it in a few videos, that when any 4 cards that have been played with in the history of tarot, it's usually those 4 cards. As I mentioned before, in the Besançon, we have Juno and Jupiter, which replace the female Pope and the Pope. And then in the, Bolognese decks, we have the 4 Moors, and there's probably other decks who fiddled around with it, and I'm not thinking of it. I think, Dionysus or the Bacchus, Bacchus was even replaced the Pope in a deck, so he's not the first person to have taken liberties with that. But here we have the 2 Fools. I think the Etteilla Fool is more in keeping with what we're accustomed to seeing with TDM. And we see this Fool is quite different. And we have all kinds of things going on in this card and every card. It's my understanding that at least each Triumph card or Trump card has been assigned a Hebrew letter of the alphabet, a path on the Tree of Life, perhaps an astrological sign or an element or a planet. So they all have arcane associations that only an adept would perhaps know. Okay, this is one of the cards that is not in a typical tarot deck and replaces one of the 4 cards I've mentioned. So Etteilla designated this, I think, as a type of querent card for the male user. So what Crowley appears to have done is to have put in an extra card. He honored the 4 cards, the female Pope, the Empress, the Emperor, and the Pope, but he put in a querent card. I guess that could be used by either person. So we do have a querent card for both people. So I'm putting that there. But for the sake of showing a card in place of whatever he had in mind here, I'm just saying it's the Hierophant. And the reason I chose this card over any other card to represent the male querent is because we see sunshine coming through the clouds, and it's supposed to represent a male questioner. And I think, the Pope is the most enlightened, or the most, supposedly enlightened of all the cards. They might say the Magus was, but after all, the Pope is higher in rank than the Magus. Has more value. So here we see definitely Egyptian references, and we see more familiar references. It's a very busy card, and then there's stuff going on, that we can barely see, like a triangle and an inverted triangle. I don't know if that's the Star of David. the sun. We have in both in common. They're very similar in many ways. We have two children. These are Pooty, but these are just regular earthbound children. And then we have a radiant sun. The moon card. So although both men subscribed, Etteilla, to the ancient Egyptian, secret knowledge that came down, through the Library of Alexandria in the form of a book or a deck of cards or whatever. I think also Crowley subscribed to an ancient Egyptian kind of mythology also. But his cards are embellished with many symbolic things that I think he learned along the way. So in both, we still have, similar motif of the sign of Aquarius and with a star. And the world card was renamed by Crowley as the universe, which I think makes a lot of sense in some ways. I don't think, in the early medieval days when the deck was created, or the 1400s, I guess that would be the Middle Ages. I don't think they were maybe thinking much beyond their own solar system sometime. Well, they were aware that I'm sure they were aware that there was a vast universe, but I think by the time this deck came to be, their minds were a little more expansive about what lay beyond. Now, I don't remember the details about when this deck was created. I think it was finished by the 40s, but was never published until 1970 something. Okay, here's another card that does not appear in a typical tarot deck. It's called Day, and the reverse is Night. And I've used the Empress to replace that for no real reason. It made the most sense of all the remaining cards we had. And here's another one. Apui. I don't remember what apui means. Let me check my cheat sheet. Number 7, apui. Beware of those who would take balance and support away from you. But I also saw the word protection in the opposite direction. And the card that came closest to protection for me is the Emperor. And it's probably not any kind of an equivalent at all. I'm just, for convenience sake, matching those unusual 4 cards of Etteilla's deck with whatever was left over in a typical deck. So we have Rams and Lambs. He's got, some recognizable and familiar attributes, such as an orb in his shield. And the female querent, which, remember, we can use the special card that, I don't know what I did with it. Oh, here it is. We can use the special card that I think Crowley assigned as the querent card, or I just stuck in the priestess as the enlightened female seeking answers. So she's fragmented by vibration, it seems, and there's a net. I mean, there's no question that this is this deck is gorgeous. You know, it's just that I just think it's overly complicated. Okay, we have Justice, which seems to have been renamed Adjustment, which is fair. When things are unjust, you readjustment. You know, how many times your parents say, you know, you need a readjustment. you need to readjust your attitude, young person. You know, sometimes when publishers or deck creators change the names, I prefer if they kept the traditional names, only because that's what it is, you know. But I can understand if they tweak things every now and then. I mean, I don't mind it so much. Okay, here we have Temperance. So we see a two-faced individual mixing from one to another. And the mythological creatures. And undoubtedly magic words. Fortitude or strength. He calls it lust. Well, that's a stretch. But that is what Crowley thought of the Fortitude card. So, in fact, is there even a lion? Well, I guess the beast's body is very abstractly made with 2 heads, 3 heads, couple heads, 5, 6 heads. And I think it's probably safe to say that most cards had a sexual connotation. As much as we are to believe that they're very lofty and, you know, filled with ancient symbolism, I think that the cards are also filled with very earthly, human frailties and thoughts. Okay. So where Etteilla disregarded the Hanged Man, because maybe he, you know, preferred to think of it as prudence, we have the Hanged Man here. I don't see any snakes here. Is that a snake? There's our snake. And there's another snake. Marriage in this card, or yeah, it's called marriage here. Here it's plural, the lovers. Now here we, you know, definitely see a more typical, you know, contractual agreement between 2 individuals who plan to be together, perhaps in a romantic way or partnership. And here we have the same thing going on, but it seems to be kind of like a ceremony of which we're not typically accustomed to. There's omnipresent being blessing or sanctioning the union. We still have Cupid up here. He's blindfolded. And we have a snake, perhaps referencing, you know, Adam and Eve, maybe. I don't know. That could be. Force majeure, which we can readily identify this as the devil. The more tarot decks we've seen, we can identify it with, you know, what we see in TDM. And this one is unlike most. It's extremely phallic. Individuals perhaps perishing or trying to escape their, I don't know, their high lust. I don't know what to make of it, but, you know. Anyway, This is what he had in mind for marriage. Or, excuse me, the devil. He calls it the devil. And we have the magician or the magus. And I believe the translation for this would be the power to overcome, malady, and here we have someone who apparently has powers. Lots of snakes. I think those are snakes. It's hard for me to see. My eyes are not so good. Judgment. And he calls it the eon. And we have an ethereal figure over, I presume that's Thoth. Perhaps he's equating we stand before Thoth to be accounted for, maybe. I'm only speaking on my own observation and not on anything that I can remember reading. All the books I've ever read on this topic was like right over my head. Okay, death. We definitely recognize death in this and other decks. I think we can probably recognize him here as well. I'm just looking, and we have some kind of scorpion, a snake, a fish, a merman. He's got his scythe. He's got a tin hat. What is that, a tin hat? He doesn't have a real head. Or if it does, it's under the tinfoil hat. Is that what that is? Did they have tinfoil hat conversations back in those days? The Hermit. More or less in keeping with what we're accustomed to seeing. Here's the gray hair of the old man, his elongated face and beard. He holds a light and illumination here. I'm sure those of you well read in Egyptian or Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology readily recognize what that is. I used to know what it is. I just can't recall. Here we have something that looks like something that I can't believe it is, so I'm going to not mention it. And another snake. His hand is holding whatever is illuminating. And here we have the tower. Now we've seen the tower in different, iterations. We've seen it with lightning striking. We've seen it with the fire emanating from the building. We've seen it with people falling. We've seen it without any kind of celestial activity, which is what we have here. I don't see any celestial activity here. Although the thing is crumbling here, but that might just be from age or decrepitude. It doesn't seem to be directly affected by anything that's happening to it. But this card couldn't be any more active if it tried. So we have steps leading up to dungeon doors, and the building is falling down, and there's fire. And there's the eye of whatever's above and beyond us, a symbol of peace. Maybe that's a symbol of not peace. I don't know. And then we have individuals falling. I'll tell you what, no matter what people have written about whatever decks, most of what I have learned about tarot has been from observing decks. It's interesting to know what's been written, but I have learned more from observing decks and comparing decks than I ever have about reading what other people who have written about it, who looked at the decks. Okay, here we have the Wheel of Fortune, or they calls it Fortune's Wheel. Not too unusual. I think we've seen this before, something similar. And here we have something that we could recognize as the wheel. You know, the wheel is being turned. It's interesting. Looks like it's being turned in this way. And then this guy falling and this guy ascending. But this guy isn't budging, because if he were to move in the way it should, he'd be going this way. But he doesn't look like he's budging at all. Let's see how this one, this one seems to be falling this way. What is this creature here? Huh. Almost looks like a snail. I don't know. Some kind of weird snake. Okay, I guess I will just do a second video, because we're already at the half-hour mark just about. And the last card in Etteilla's Triumph order is the Chariot. And we have, you know, a charioteer and a open chariot. And we can readily recognize this as the Chariot. And it's called the Chariot, but we have, you know, mythological horses, or in place of the horses. He's got a magic disc, perhaps. He's heavily armored. He's got a crab on his head. He's got huge wheels on his chariot and a canopy to protect him from the elements on a cobbled road. The backs of the cards are thus. All right, now I will go into the pip cards, and I will do that in another video. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, be kind, and do no harm.